Welcome. Today we are going to see React.js and with web service integration. I'm also going to talk about integrating with Redux and React Router DOM. So I'm going to put all together and we're going to see certain practices like how we make a remote web service calls and bring the data from the remote services. For this, I've already built URL endpoints for adding the students. So for example, uh, the very first example we created students record. So the same thing with a minimalistic approach, and I have exposed certain URL endpoints. So we are going to communicate, retrieve all the student records, and of course add, edit, and delete the records. So this time the server is going to hold all the data, and we are going to consume them using Ajax or the we asynchronously make a communication to the remote web services and get the data ready, and we will use them into our React.js project. Before that, let's create a simple React.js project first. So let me move on to my, so this is a folder. I keep it as a workspace. I write all my React.js applications here. So npx create React app. Just students record, then I have given the name of the application. So it's going to install all the dependencies, and of course we are going to add few more dependencies after this project creation. I'm going to add all the usuals. So this exercise is going to be a mix of all. So for whatever we have discussed, it's going to consist everything. And one more topic added. That's what I was talking about. It has an Ajax call. So let me get into the project first. Students record. So let me add few more dependencies. So the dependencies, as we know, uh, Redux, React Redux, and React Router DOM, and of course our usuals like Bootstrap, jQuery. So jQuery actually required by Bootstrap. It's nothing. We will be explicitly using any jQuery calls in our project. We won't be using them. .js. So sorry, there is a keyword missing. Make sure add npm install. So all these packet dependencies will be added. Now I'm skipping the keyword save because right now it is default, and whatever entries we add using npm install will be added directly into the package.json file. So before that, it's going to do a couple of tasks. Before that, let's closely see the API document. It's a very tiny little document I have created. So this document is so I have a login. So instead, I've been given a registration option. So I provide the test login. User email is going to be admin.com, and the user password is going to be 1234567 hash. It's for our testing purpose because I haven't exposed the registration option here. So because just to get a idea on how the web services can be put into use. That's a focus today though. That's why I've kept everything in the method post, and of course how it is going to work. Once you send the username password, you will be provided a JWT token that we would be storing into our local storage. So local storage and session storage are the part of uh, uh, window object, and of course now we can directly access them and persist them. Local storage will be permanent as long as the browser uninstall that entry could be there. As long as that same application deletes it, it's going to be there. Session storage is only lasts until the browser session uh, is open, or maybe until it is like once it is getting closed, maybe the tab or the entire browser gets closed, session storage will be removed. So that's all other points. So we need to store them, and then in order to get all the students entry, we need to pass the authorization token. Along with that, when you make a post call, you will be given an array. We'll see the sample response maybe once we run it, and similarly how to add, edit, delete, all the options have also been given. The payloads, what all the detail have to be sent, has also been given. For add, we don't need to send student ID, but for edit, we need to send the student ID. It is more or less like a similar thing what we did in our very first example, where we created a conditional rendering, and we populated a form, a table from a form. So, but this time it's going to be persisted. The data is going to be remotely saved. So it's going to be pretty interesting going forward. Let's see. Okay, I think it's done. It added all the dependencies of like so let's see: jQuery, Redux, React Readers, React Router, DOM, Popper, Bootstrap, everything got added. If anything missing, we'll add them as required. So now let's move on to our Visual Studio Code. Let's open, and this is a folder, students record. Now we have our project open. Let's have a look at our index.js. This is where we'll be adding the bootstrap dependencies. So as we know already, the CSS and the JavaScript dependents only need to be added. Now our bootstrap dependency is added. Okay. Let's have the plan. Like here I'm going to talk additional points apart from the web service call and Redux integration. I'm going to create a conditional rendering using React Router DOM, and going to have a password protected pages. So we'll have to plan the routing accordingly now. So before that, let's create a couple of components. So let me create a folder for components. Also create a folder for routes. So this is where the router specification is going to be placed. So let's create a couple of components, then we'll get into. So the usual components are add edit.js and view all.js, and one more new component I'm going to add, which is logging for login purpose. And what else we probably require, this add edit and view all is protected pages, and they won't be displayed. So any welcome screen, something like that, if we have, maybe we'll have a welcome. Okay. So typical components. So here I'm going to name them. Let's add the imports. So the usual way we create, we'll also leave with the render function with the return statement. As of now, I'll just keep a sample block. Say add edit, because we'll have to first verify our routers are working properly. So I'm just going to create the basic components with a simple view. Then we'll add the Redux dependencies and our web service dependencies. So I'm just going to save them. Same way, let's create all the components. All the components are here. And let's also define the routing plan, how we are going to display them. So let's go to the folder routes, so which we have just created, and going to create a route. Sorry, route. I don't want to use the keywords. Say router block, some name. Remember, this block won't be displayed anywhere, though we are defining it as a component, but it's only carry the blueprint of how the URLs are going to load. So that's a part it is going to contain. Okay. The router block is going to be set of rules. So we need a group element, so we are not going to use a div here. Instead, we prefer to use React fragment. So let's plan here. So the route, which is going to be the rules what we are going to use in this app. Okay, let's define a route, an exact path, the component. Remember, it's an attribute, so lowercase, completed. So we'll just load the welcome page to start with. So in exact, because the exact part is important, because it has to only see the slash at the end, not the any other value which is coming in. Okay. The rest of the path are going to be password protected. Sorry, there is one more route which is path we define. It's called login. So when the user press type on /login, this login component will be loaded. The rest of the path are going to be protected. That's very important. Okay, how we can protect the path. Before that, let's make sure our following paths are working correct or not. And we haven't done one thing, because the app.js still carrying the welcome page. So let's start our server. Okay, now we got the welcome page, so let's modify the welcome page. We typically use our standard component-based design. Throughout this exercise, I use the component-based approach rather than the function, because at the end everything is objects here in terms of JavaScript. So I prefer to create a component-based approach. So that's what I've used throughout this workshop. Okay, so here let's create a higher order component so that so now it's changed. The higher order component, which is going to be wrapping part of, like, routers. So first thing, we need to import React router DOM to make sure the browser router we are using, and I'm just giving it alias name router. So let's create that as a higher order component. Remember, we will also create one more higher order component when we integrate what you call Redux. Until then, we don't need to. We are going to keep the router as a higher order component. And finally, the router block, which carries all the blueprint of our path, is being added. Make sure it's been imported. Visual Studio Code automatically imports for the local component whatever we create. So now we should see the welcome screen, because the router has, whenever this path is required, it's going to invoke a welcome component rather than the app component, because app component is just a placeholder now, so nothing it has. So okay, also we'll verify if I can go to login. Yes, I do get the login component. So the routers are working as expected. But here we need to do a couple of things. How we are going to protect the path, meaning the rest of the component should be shown only after user successfully logs in. So how we are going to handle that situation? So the user does not see those components if he is not logged in. Let's create a constant name protected route. I'm just trying to extend the route which is carrying the path. Here we need to check whether the user is logged in or not. So we are just extending the existing route and trying to add additional feature. So we can create, we can extend it feature by duly creating a function with a return statement. That takes one argument, which is a JavaScript object. One requires a property name component, whatever the component being supplied, and the rest of the properties. Okay. With the return statement, we can actually define the route and make sure you pass the rest attributes. And okay, here what to render, this is where the conditional part is going to come. When the user logged in, render the component as usual with the whatever the props being handed over. If not, redirect the user to somewhere. So I've already added the redirect import to React Router DOM. So it's a function having props argument, and which also requires a return statement because the rendering part. So there is a conditional render. I'm going to use a local storage because I'm planning to store my JWT tokens in local storage. So if that JWT token found, so see that a keyword I'm using JWT at this point, anything you can use. You can use login or object, whatever it is. So if true, let it render the component with all props being handed over. If not, let the user redirected to login page. So the condition is simple. So we are just creating a route name is called protected route, which in turn checks the local storage. If the local storage entry is found, it will allow the component to load. Otherwise, it will redirect the user to login. So let's call that route protected route path. Specify, and we'll say all. Similarly, added it. Okay. These two components is inside the protected route, so those won't be loaded until the user logs in. So let's check them. Okay, so the welcome screen, no issues. So I'm trying to call the view all. See that the user is redirected to login. The user will be at login even though if I explicitly try to call the URL, because these components have been protected by the router. So creating a customized router is nothing but creating the instance and have the render function or render attribute with a function definition. Remember, see, there is a two return statement, not to get confused, because the return in this case returns the route. The route in turn has a render attribute which expects a JavaScript function, which has a condition inside. When the user logged in, if any JWT tokens found, load the component as it is. Otherwise, redirect the user to log. So, let me break it down a bit. Okay, so question mark, true or false. Okay, so this is the router block